to receive testimony on the Defense Department's role in the federal response to the COVID-19 crisis. Our witnesses are Ms. Stacy Cummings, who is performing the duties of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Mr. Robert Salas, who is performing the duties of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Global Security, and General Gus Perna, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the Federal COVID-19 Response for Vaccines and Therapeutics. The organization was formerly known as Operation Warp Speed. I want to welcome our witnesses and thank them not only for appearing today, but for their tireless work in helping our nation address this terrible pandemic. America recently passed a grim milestone, over 500,000 recorded deaths from COVID-19. The impact of these losses is tragic and immeasurable. Yet recent developments and trends offer a glimmer of hope. The CDC reports that the daily number of new cases has declined approximately 70% from their peak in mid-January. Positivity rates for testing are down, and the rate of hospitalizations and the number of new deaths are decreasing. More than 65 million vaccines have been administered, and the daily vaccination average is now over 1.6 million doses. However, more needs to be done. The goal remains to accelerate vaccination efforts nationwide and scale up our ability to get shots to the people who need them. This requires transparency, clear communication, and accountability at every level of government. The Department of Defense's support to civil authorities has been critical for delivering help to pandemic-stricken Americans and their communities. The committee is interested in hearing about the Department of Defense's contributions to the whole of government response to the COVID-19 crisis, and what more the Department can do to help get this pandemic under control and allow Americans to return to normalcy. The public-private partnership, originally known as Operation Warp Speed, mobilized the Defense Department's extensive contracting capabilities to accelerate efforts to develop and produce COVID-19 vaccines. The Department's contracting capabilities include in-depth experience managing large-dollar contracting with drug manufacturers through DoD's Joint Program Executive Office for Chemical, Radiological, Biological, and Nuclear Defense. This office has overseen billions of dollars in contracts for various aspects of the response, including helping to support research activities, conduct clinical trials, increase the production of tests, and manufacture hundreds of millions of additional vaccine doses. General Perna, the committee is interested in knowing more about this element of your effort and what we can do to further aid the necessary research on and production of COVID-19 vaccines. The Office of the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment has helped lead efforts by the Defense Department's acquisition workforce to support the interagency COVID-19 response efforts. Ms. Cummings, I would appreciate if you could tell us about the Defense Department's role in that effort, as well as actions by the Department to support the defense industrial base during this economically challenging time. We are particularly interested in the use of the Defense Production Act and other acquisition authorities, and whether those authorities need to be enhanced or adjusted to support this important work. The ability to improve the rollout of the vaccine across the nation will depend critically on the government's ability to procure the vaccines and the associated equipment needed to administer millions of doses. We are depending on the DoD acquisition workforce to help make sure that this is done as quickly as possible. The Department has also responded to requests for support from the states and the Federal Emergency Management Agency by deploying significant military personnel from both the National Guard and active duty units. Missions being conducted by more than 28,000 National Guard members across the country include giving vaccinations and providing medical treatment. Earlier this week, the Department announced the deployment of a second Army vaccination support team consisting of approximately 140 personnel to Texas to support the COVID-19 response and assist in vaccination efforts, and additional vaccination support teams are being ready. Mr. Salas says these missions are critically important for getting shots in the arms of Americans, but these deployments must also have an impact on readiness, and I'm hoping you can give us information on that topic. Finally, the committee is concerned about the impact of the pandemic on the health and safety of our Defense Department personnel and operations. The Department reports that it has administered nearly 1 million vaccines to DoD personnel, including both first and second doses. At the same time, however, it is reported that nearly one-third of service members are opting not to voluntarily receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Mr. Salas, I hope you can address the Department's vaccination policies and plans, the latest transmission rates of the virus among military personnel, and how the Department's response is impacting our military operations at home and abroad. Thank you again to our witnesses for appearing this morning, and I look forward to your testimony. And let me recognize the ranking member, Senator Inhofe. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that we all know this is something that's not been precedented, and we've never experienced it before. It's one of the most trying periods in our nation's history, and we mourn the loss of over 500,000 Americans. We're thinking of the thousands of Americans who are infected every day, and for those who still suffer from the disease's long-term effects. And speaking of long-term effects, we are devastated by the continued closure of schools and shutdowns of businesses. The pandemic created unprecedented challenges for federal, state, and local governments. The Defense Department played a vital role in the pandemic response from the beginning, starting by assisting HHS in housing in Americans who had been evacuated from China. In the months that followed, over 47,000 guardsmen, including hundreds from my state of Oklahoma, mobilized to staff testing centers and deliver food and provided medical support. The Army Corps of Engineers constructed 38 new alternative care facilities around the country, adding over 17,000 hospital beds to handle the surge of patients. DoD partnered with HHS in Operation Warp Speed, promising to deliver a safe and effective vaccine by 2021, and they did. Many doubted that the vaccine could be discovered so quickly. For example, when the previous administration announced the plans of having the vaccine by the end of the year, an NBC News fact check said he would need a miracle to be right. And we're talking about the Trump administration. You'd need a miracle to be right. But by the end of 2020, the Trump administration's effort paid off, and we had the miracle. Simple as that. And I don't know why people aren't talking about that right now. We had 2 safe and extremely effective vaccines that were discovered, and we got another one that's coming on, it's my understanding, this weekend. As the National Institutes of Health Director, Francis Collins, who was an Obama appointee, recently remarked, Operation Warp Speed, quote, was an effort that many of us were not initially convinced was going to be necessary. The Trump administration's success in the record time, in his words, and this is Francis Collins making this statement, he said, it was just breathtaking. So thanks to you, General Perna, and your team. You know, I've watched this happen. When you first announced, it was back in the summertime, and we had a hearing right after that. You said warp speed. I never did understand where warp speed came from, but it wasn't my idea. It wasn't Jack's idea. But anyway, it was a success, a huge success. Especially remarkable is how the Operation Warp Speed has revolutionized our previous way of doing things. Under your leadership, General Perna, and I believe it was your leadership, we're seeing vaccines move from the conveyor belt to the supplier to the American families in just days. This has never happened before. I'm heartened by this program that there is certainly more work to be done. We understand that. But I hope we will learn in this hearing about DOD's efforts to accelerate vaccine production and administration. I want to conclude by thanking our 3 witnesses, each of whom oversees a vital part of the response effort, and the thousands of men and women in uniform who have served admirably during this incredibly difficult period. Let me just add one thing, what probably is not really germane to this, but we had a hearing yesterday, and I heard from, it was classified, but I'm not at all satisfied that we need to have all of these resources out there now. We have all these individuals that are here, the Guard. This is not their job. This is not what they're trained for. This is not what they're capable of doing. And all the barbed wire is, I think it's seen this day, and so let me just voice that as an opinion that you may agree or disagree with. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. And now let me recognize the witnesses. We'll begin with Mr. Salas, and that's not because you're from Rhode Island. It's the proper way to begin. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Senator. Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on the Department of Defense's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has posed an unprecedented challenge on our nation. Since the start, DoD has protected its people, supported the national response, and ensured the readiness of the force to meet its national security missions. To protect DoD personnel from the pandemic, DoD implemented measures to contain and mitigate the effects on the force, including force health protection guidance, restriction of movement orders, social distancing, mask wearing, telework on an unprecedented scale, testing and contact tracing. DoD has also established a tiered vaccination plan, following CDC guidance tailored to DoD's unique requirements. As of 23 February, DoD has administered over 1 million doses of vaccine. DoD support to the national response to the COVID pandemic has evolved over the last 13 months. DoD assistance began in late January 2020, supporting the repatriation of U.S. citizens and U.S. persons to the United States. In support of the State Department, U.S. Transcom facilitated the safe return of more than 4,500 Americans. In support of HHS, U.S. Northcom, and Indo-PACOM, and the military departments aided in the quarantine of more than 3,000 individuals on 13 DoD installations. As the pandemic spread over the late winter, early spring of 2020, hospitalizations increased rapidly, and state and local demand rose for both medical facilities and medical providers. HHS and FEMA turned to DoD to help meet this demand. Northcom deployed over 15,000 DoD personnel, including 5,000 active duty and reserve medical professionals to 10 states and multiple locations within those states. Indo-PACOM provided similar support in Hawaii, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers designed and constructed 38 alternate care facilities, providing additional medical bed capacity in multiple states, up to 16,000 beds. Working with FEMA, DoD also authorized National Guard personnel to carry out FEMA COVID-19 mission assignments in Title 32 status. More than 47,000 National Guard personnel supported testing, emergency medical care, medical sheltering, public health, communications, transportation, logistics, and first responder support. The National Guard is also supporting state vaccine efforts in 43 states at over 350 sites and have administered over 1 million doses of vaccine. DoD also played a critical role in strengthening the national supply chain for medical resources and PPE in short supply. With DoD assistance, FEMA and HHS established the Supply Chain Task Force in late March of 2020 to accelerate acquisition, expand production by generating new capacity, and allocate key resources and supplies to priority hotspots around the nation. In late March of 2020, DoD also established the COVID Joint Acquisition Task Force to serve as the DoD nexus for supporting federal acquisition and logistics needs to restock the strategic national stockpile and expand the domestic industrial base for medical supplies and equipment. Building on decades of work studying infectious disease in the department, such as Ebola and the coronaviruses, DoD experts helped genetically sequence COVID-19 and establish the first treatment protocol for remdesivir in the spring. Further, DARPA-funded projects help lay the groundwork for rapid development of RNA COVID-19 vaccines produced by Moderna and AstraZeneca. The joint DoD-HHS Vaccine Task Force, established in May of 2020, accelerated the development, manufacturing, and distribution of COVID vaccine in record time. As Secretary Austin made clear in his day one message to the department, DoD must move further and faster to help counter the COVID-19 pandemic. To that end, DoD with FEMA have developed plans to support vaccine centers able to administer up to 6,000 vaccines a day. DoD is actively supporting California, Texas, New York, and New Jersey with over 1,000 personnel at the newly established vaccine centers. FEMA has also provided mission assignments to DoD to support sites in Florida, Pennsylvania, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, with several other states making final arrangements for DoD support. Going forward, DoD is actively implementing President Biden's national strategy, executive orders, and national security policy memorandums, and is committed to executing the President's and Secretary Austin's direction to defeat COVID-19 pandemic, defend the force against COVID-19 while protecting our nation. Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I appreciate the critical role and the support Congress provides in ensuring the department is prepared to face every challenge at home and abroad.
Well, thank you very much. Let me now recognize Ms. Cummings. Ms. Cummings?
Thank you. Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, and distinguished members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today to showcase the accomplishments of the Defense Acquisition and Logistics workforce in response to the COVID-19 global pandemic. DoD has played a vital role supporting the interagency to acquire and deliver medical resources, to include PPE, and to establish and strengthen the domestic medical industrial base. Leveraging various acquisition tools to include the Defense Production Act, the DoD executed contracts and agreements valued at over $30 billion in support of the national response. This includes over $3 billion in direct assisted acquisition to procure and deliver medical items and PPE requested by FEMA and HHS. Additionally, through 34 awards valued at $1.8 billion, we've established and expanded domestic PPE and medical supply chains in partnership with HHS. We also coordinated the shipment and delivery of COVID-19 test kits, needles, and syringes from abroad through the U.S. Transportation Command. The CARES Act provided $1 billion in Defense Production Act Title III funding to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus. As documented in the department's spend plan, we allocated $213 million to increase production capacity for critical health resources, targeting N95 respirators and COVID-19 testing capacity. $687 million was allocated to mitigate financial impacts to companies within the defense industrial base to ensure the survival of national security critical capabilities, and $1 million allocated to establish a loan program in partnership with the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. The defense industrial base is the nexus of national and economic security. With congressional support, the DoD took immediate steps to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the defense industrial base, beginning with frequent and meaningful engagement with industry and a series of formal issuances to ensure DoD contracting officers and industry partners had the information and tools they needed to sustain mission-critical operations. Our resulting implementation approach was incorporated across 46 policy documents, focusing on 3 broad areas. First, allowing companies to continue to work safely. Second, providing liquidity to the defense industrial base. And third, implementing legislation such as Section 3610 of the CARES Act to ensure complete spending transparency. I would also like to note that, like their commercial counterparts, the organic industrial base experienced financial and production challenges that would have had negative long-term impacts to military readiness had Congress and the department not intervened. The department undertook actions to restore production operations to normal levels, and the organic industrial base continues to manage and stabilize depot-level production, due in large part to a $1.5 billion cash infusion to the Defense Working Capital Fund. I am incredibly proud of the Department's response to this national emergency and of the dedicated individuals who have worked so hard on behalf of the American people. I'm grateful for the transparency and dialogue with professional staff members of the defense committees, and I thank you for your support and the opportunity to testify before you today. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me join Senator Inhofe in commending you, General Perna, for your extraordinary work over the many months, and you're recognized now. Thank you.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, distinguished members of the committee.
Microphone, please.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity and true honor to testify before you today on the Vaccines and Therapeutics operation under COVID-19 response. Over the past 9 months, I have had the privilege to co-lead the operation with Dr. Moncef Slaoui and now Dr. David Kessler. Our mission was to accelerate development, manufacturing, and delivery of vaccines and therapeutics for our nation. I know you agree with me when I say this virus attacked our nation. It attacked our way of life, and it impacted every American. But it became obvious that our nation had never fought this type of enemy before, and that there was no single government or private organization that had the capacity, capability, or expertise to execute the mission of defeating this virus. We also lacked unity of command and effort to develop, manufacture, and distribute the vaccines to the entire American population, much less at the scale and speed required to defeat this pandemic. Thus, the reason for Operation Warp Speed and our strategy of whole of America approach. We approach this mission with the urgency, resolve, and steadfast determination our nation deserves. And as we were fighting a near-peer competitor in a large combat operation, we gave it everything every day. We operationalized our effort through 3 key tenets. First, all of our decisions were rooted in science and data. We refused to sacrifice safety for speed. Second, we are leveraging all resources available to scale up domestic manufacturing and assessing every contract for use with the Defense Production Act authorities. Finally, we built our distribution strategy on existing vaccine infrastructure, a tested network that could expand to new requirements, refined by the professionals at the CDC and almost virtually flawlessly executed by private industry. And through unprecedented collaboration from our best public and private experts in science, logistics, manufacturing, and security, our nation rose to the challenge. Because of our whole of America approach and the collective efforts of the federal, state, and local governments, private industry, and the healthcare community, today I can report that we have developed 2 safe and effective vaccines and 3 safe and effective therapeutics authorized for use. There will be more soon. We steadily increased our manufacturing capacity that will result in enough doses available to all Americans by this summer. And we have delivered more than 90 million doses of vaccine to date across 50 states and 8 territories to the right locations in the right conditions in near flawless execution. Those are our nation's accomplishments, and all Americans can be proud of how far we have come in a short amount of time. More importantly, Americans can have hope and optimism that we are on the offense and we will defeat this virus. We will win. We have a lot of work in front of us, and we will not rest until every American has access to vaccine and therapeutics. We continue to learn and we continue to get better every day, constantly improving our processes, remaining agile and adaptive to the challenges and obstacles in front of us. Like we do in every combat situation, we always assess ourselves, the environment, and the enemy, and we adjust accordingly. I am incredibly proud of the small team of 100 DoD service members and civilians who have selflessly served in the background of this operation for the past 9 months and will continue to do so until the mission is complete. Through the pandemic and changing environment, our team remains 100% committed and focused on executing the mission asked of us. We took an oath to support and defend our nation, and every single day, we bring intensity and vigor to get this job done. Your congressional support and advocacy have been pivotal to accomplishing these milestones that we have achieved so far and those that we will achieve. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, sir. With some senators attending remotely, I want to let everyone know how the hearing will run. Since it isn't possible to know exactly when our colleagues who will be joining via the computer arrive, we will not be following our standard early bird timing rule. Instead, we will handle the order of questions by seniority, alternating sides until we have gone through everyone. Once we reach the end, if there is anyone we miss, we will start back at the top of the list and continue until everyone has had their turn. We will do the standard 5-minute rounds, and I ask my colleagues on the computers to please keep an eye on the clock, which you should see on your screen. Finally, to allow for everyone to be heard, whether in the room or on a computer, I ask all colleagues to please mute your microphone when not speaking. Thank you very much. I have a question I'd like to address to the whole panel, beginning with Ms. Cummings, and then a final question for General Perna. But basically, Ms. Cummings, what do you think are the greatest challenges in your area of responsibility, and what resources or policy changes do you feel you need? Please.
Thank you for that question, Chairman Reed. So throughout the opportunity for the DoD to participate in the national response, we've done so in support of our colleagues at HHS. We leveraged many authorities, including the Economy Act, which allowed HHS to use their authority and funding and share that with the DoD, as well as the Defense Production Act. There are certainly flexibilities that the CARES Act provided to the DoD under the Defense Production Act in that authority for the way that we spent our Title III funding. So additional flexibilities in the Defense Production Act, we'd be happy to work with your staff to talk more about how we might be able to work together to do that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Salasys.
Sorry, Chairman. My view is that we need to continue our aggressive mitigation efforts, mask wearing, social distancing, all of those types of things, continue to increase our testing capacity and our contact tracing capabilities, and thirdly, get the vaccine.
Well, thank you very much. And General Perna, your comments about the challenges you face and the resources or policy changes you would need.
Chairman, as I mentioned, we have never done this as a nation before.
Is your microphone on, sir?
I apologize, Chairman.
That's okay.
I'm trainable. Chairman, as I talked about in my opening comment, we've never faced these challenges before. I think the success that we achieved by coming together at the federal level, HHS and Department of Defense, invoking the partnership with industry, academia, and then bringing the states and local governments into play from the beginning, right? Early on planning and then execution and remaining flexible and adaptable to our challenges has been our greatest success to date. Now, clearly, we could not have done what we've done so far if we did not have the backbone that was already established in the work by our great scientists to develop and have the capability to bring vaccines rapidly into place. And we must continue to sustain that research and support to that end. Second, the use of the DPA has been immeasurable in our ability to manage supply chain for materials, consumables, and equipment, as well as production, to ensure that we have capability to deliver the vaccines. And then the last part, and therapeutics. And the last part, I will say, I would be remiss if I did not thank publicly the heroic work that currently Pfizer, Moderna, McKesson, FedEx, and UPS are doing to distribute the vaccine. It is their infrastructure, their leadership, their workforce, and their ability to handle the vaccine. When many people thought we couldn't manage the cold chain, these leaders and organizations did so, and is leading to our success.
Well, thank you very much, General. And just since you've been so instrumental in everything that is going on and performed, I would say heroically, and I thank you very much. Just looking ahead, what do you think the way ahead is for the COVID response? We've looked back at what we've done. Looking ahead, give us an idea of what you think might happen.
Chairman, I would coach us all collectively not to continue in the same thought process. In other words, we created a solution for one purpose, and we're just going to continue to exercise. We must take a moment and truly understand what is the potential future requirements and hence the purpose of what might need to be done. For example, and truly a White House policy decision, but will lead to everything else. You know, what is the role going to be in helping the rest of the world after we take care of the United States with vaccines? What will be requirement for booster shots, if any, or shots required for mutation support? And what will be the decision about how much manufacturing and supply chain capability do we want inside of the country? Once we determine, and not limited to those questions, then we must really understand how we're going to go about that. What is the organization that must do that? Is it going to be a specified already organization in place, or will we create an organization? And then what will we do to resource it, man it, prioritize it, and support it is the way we need to look at the future.
Thank you very much. Indeed, thank you all for your testimony and your hours and hours of dedicated service to the country at a critical moment. Thank you. Senator Inhofe, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, General Perna, you pretty much cleared this up in your opening statement, and yet people are still, I think a lot of them in the media are saying that they claim that there is no plan for distribution of the after it was approved. Now, I know this isn't true, but is there anything that you didn't cover in your opening statement, real briefly, to counter this? Because that's a statement that's they got to quit talking like that.
So, Senator, thank you. And as you and I have discussed many times, there was
You might talk about what that plan was first and how that was changed or has been improved since December.
Sure. So initial plans, you know, in support of the directive, specified mission, develop, manufacture, and deliver vaccines were very elaborate and well-defined as we had to figure out what were the vaccines, what we were going to pursue for development, to neck it down from many possibilities down to 6. We had to look at the manufacturing capacity in the country and abroad to make sure that we had capability and capacity. We did very detailed work and analysis to ensure that we had both drug substance, development of the product, and drug product, which is the eventual fill finish. We had to make sure that space existed and that we had priority, and we had to execute it in a very precise manner to that end. And then we had to manage and plan for the product coming off of the conveyor belt, right? Normal, usual execution when we make influenza vaccine, it's an order. The country orders vaccine, the pharmaceutical companies produce it, and then they deliver it. In this case, what we did is we were manufacturing it. We started 6 months ago so that we would get through the process and have vaccines available as early as December. And
General, I agree with that, and I think that it was best said, as I mentioned in my opening statement, by Francis Collins, who was an Obama appointee, that it was just breathtaking, the miracle that took place. And I put it in that category, and I appreciate that response. But we're running out of time.
apologize.
Secretary Cummings, I want to ask you something I found out, and I was surprised to find this out, and that was something, I believe it came from HHS, that 80% of our needle and syringe supply has come from China. Is that correct? And then what do we want to do to try to get back on top of this?
That is correct, and we have assisted HHS with transportation to get those needles and syringes into the United States to support the delivery of vaccines. We have an opportunity to leverage both the authorities of the Defense Production Act, but also the authorities of the Economy Act to invest in syringes and needles. We have actually invested in some innovative technology for vaccine delivery to increase the domestic production here in the United States so that those capabilities can be made here.
So you're aware of this and are addressing this problem. It was a surprise to me to hear this. Do you feel you're on the road to resolving that problem?
We are on the road to seeking solutions to that problem. We have made some investments to date, and I think that there are more investments to be made in the future.
That's good. Good work. The last thing I wanted to bring up, because this is a thing that is, I have a hard time understanding why it's true, but there's so many people are reluctant to use the vaccine. The figure that I would use in a recent study, 1 out of 3 American adults said that they definitely or probably won't get the vaccine when it becomes available. That's a shocker to me, because it's not, first of all, it's not just them, it's others that are affected by their willingness to get the vaccine. So I'd like to ask you, or any of the witnesses, what are we doing right now to try to educate people as to why it's necessary to have this vaccine?
Senator, I can talk about what the Defense Department is doing. More broadly, I think some of the things that we're doing would be helpful. There's a lot of misinformation out there about the vaccine. The vaccine is safe, as General Perna has pointed out, as many have pointed out. I think that what we need to do is ensure that we have the right level of education and awareness that goes on out there. And from a DoD perspective, obviously we use our military chain of command. And the opportunity to educate and train people and to clear up those misconceptions can be very helpful. We've seen that happen in the Defense Department. We've only been at this for about 60 days, but where we've seen vaccine rates a little bit lower, acceptance rates, the commands are getting involved, providing education forums, having the opportunity to have town halls and those types of things to provide that insight.
Yeah, that's good. And last week, I think it was stated that 1/3 of the service members are opting out, and so I'm glad you're addressing that, because it's we're concerned about the whole public, but definitely our service members. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Senator Shaheen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me echo the chairman and ranking members' thanks to each of you for all of your effort over the last year. I want to pick up on Senator Inhofe's question about syringes, Ms. Cummings, because I just want to point out we have a company in New Hampshire, Smiths Medical, that has been producing syringes. They've had a contract with BARDA, which I appreciate is not in your purview, but they need some certainty in order to address their supply chain concerns, and right now they're waiting to hear from the department about whether they're going to have a continued contract. So we have a lot of companies out there, as you all know so well, who really want to help in this effort, but they can't make the expenditures unless they have some certainty that what they're producing is going to be needed. And one of the areas where I think the DPA has been very helpful has been with the personal protective equipment. We have 2 companies in New Hampshire, Lidl, which is producing N95 mask materials, and American Performance Polymers, which is producing non-latex rubber gloves. Again, it's been the contract with DoD that has allowed both of them to expand in a way that is going to be able to produce what we need to help with our PPE supply. So I guess one question I would have for you, I assume this is for you, Ms. Cummings, is to follow up, is there more that Congress needs to do with the Defense Production Act to make sure that you have the capacity you need to do the contracts with the companies so they can produce what we need to address this pandemic?
So, Senator, I agree that a common theme that we heard throughout the pandemic from the industrial base, the medical and PPE industrial base, is this lack of long-term consistent demand. And there are tools available in the Defense Production Act in order to create guarantees for future procurement. Those guarantees need to come with funding. And so the Defense Production Act has the authority. It needs to have the associated appropriation that is long-term in nature, which the DPA Title III is long-term in nature. So that is a great tool. We have other tools under the CARES Act and other appropriations from HHS where we've been able to make similar type investments as the DPA Title III. We've been using an authority the Congress gave to DoD called Commercial Solutions Openings, which gives us the opportunity to very quickly find those unique companies, especially commercial companies that we don't usually work with in the department, and be able to engage them to be able to make those strategic investments. We'd like to continue to do that in partnership and support of HHS.
Well, thank you. As I said, I think we all know there are a lot of companies that are really interested in helping. Mm-hmm. I had a conversation, Senator Rounds and I had a conversation late last fall with former Assistant Secretary Jordan Gillis about DLA's cash posture. And one concern was that they had had a significant reduction in their obligation authority, which was affecting their ability to contract. Can you talk about that and whether that's been cleared up? And are you comfortable that DLA has what it needs?
I am actually watching that very closely. I get a bi-weekly report on their cash position. We work with the comptroller to make sure they have everything they need to remain solvent and have the obligation authority to support both DoD needs and the vast amount of HHS and FEMA needs that they're meeting. Right now, we are good in our operating position, but I will let you know if that changes.
Thank you. I think that goes along with the point you made about appropriations. There also needs to be some certainty in appropriations, and I appreciate that, and I think that's something where this committee needs to reinforce the importance of that. I don't know who this question is for, but I know that last night President Biden announced a new effort to deliver 25 million masks to the nation's most vulnerable populations through both DoD and the Department of Health and Human Services, and that the plan is to make those masks available beginning in March into May. So has the department met and talked about how they're going to deal with this distribution of the mask and
Senator,
what we need to do to support that effort?
Senator, normally something like that would be managed by FEMA. We could be asked, though, to support that. A good organization to kind of provide that kind of support would be the National Guard to get that out. So I imagine that as the plan is being developed, we will be part of that, and we'll be working closely with FEMA, the state and local authorities, to make sure that we can maximize the distribution of those masks to those communities.
And if there are companies who would like to help engage in this effort and fill this need, is there a contact person? Should they go through FEMA? Should they go through DoD? Should they go through HHS?
Turn it over to Stacy.
The DoD is working closely with HHS. There will be a request for proposals through the Defense Logistics Agency. We'll be following our normal processes to ensure that the masks are made in America by Americans, and we'll support the distribution as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Senator Cotton via WebEx. Senator Cotton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of our witnesses for appearing. I want to commend you and the department for your great efforts over these last 12 months. I specifically want to commend General Perna for his leadership of Operation Warp Speed, which has helped develop these vaccines in record times, and I think have us on the cusp of turning the corner on this virus. Ms. Cummings, the Defense Production Act was originally passed 70 years ago to ensure the availability of industrial resources to meet the department's needs, and Congress has updated it several times over the years, and we continue to believe it's an effective tool that can be used to mitigate risk to the industrial base. Based on the department's experience using those authorities during the pandemic to address both medical and defense industrial base issues, are there any changes to the legislation that could help the department or other federal agencies use it more effectively in the future that you would like this committee to consider?
when the pandemic began and we were looking at the opportunity under the Defense Production Act Title III, we looked at whether or not other executive branch agencies via the Economy Act could actually transfer funding into our Defense Production Act Title III account. We learned that that was not authorized, and so that is definitely a flexibility that I think would be useful to be able to expand the use of Defense Production Act to execute the authorities of other executive branch departments. The Defense Production Act, to your point, is extremely valuable, and the authorization to be able to, through contracts across multiple executive branch agencies, prioritize the delivery of those items rests across not just the Department of Defense, but also other executive branch agencies. For example, HHS has the authority to rate health resources, whereas in DOD, we have the authority to rate contracts that are related to defense authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question for you, Ms. Cummings. From an acquisition sustainment perspective, has the pandemic broadened the department's perspective on what it considers as critical for national security? For instance, things versus like N95 masks now versus where you might have been a year ago. Are there areas where we're not self-sufficient in any new perspective that we should be?
So thank you, Senator. Yes, we realized early on that our dependence on a global supply chain became a national security risk when those lines of transportation were cut. I'm pleased to say that in the department, to meet our departmental needs, we actually have very good processes in place to stockpile or to have war stopper programs, so that we did not find ourselves in a situation where we weren't prepared to be able to support our medical community with the items that they needed. Now, there are still critical PPE items that we need to continue to work on onshoring, such as nitrile gloves. Those are only made, almost exclusively only made outside of the United States. But it wasn't just medical supply chains, also our national security supply chains, the defense industrial base. We have identified in our industrial capabilities report, which we published in January, other fragile supply chains that we intend to work with the interagency to ensure that we're coming up with solutions to onshore and support the long-term sustainability of those supply chains domestically.
Good, thank you. I think it's really vital that we look at it through this new perspective and that we identify places where our supply chains are entirely offshore and that we try to get them at least back to the United States, and that we're not relying on sole or committed source products out of China, and secondarily out of Taiwan, and third, out of any country within missile range of mainland China. Finally, General Perna, I want to direct this to you since you're still wearing the uniform. You had a long career of serving with soldiers and leading soldiers. There's been some concerning reports in the news about vaccine decline rates among service members. Can you give us thoughts on why that is and what we can do to make sure all of our service members are getting vaccinated as soon as the vaccine is available to them?
Senator, I think that I would just reassure my teammates, the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardmen that serve, that we have the greatest scientists in the world that worked on these vaccines. Our pharmaceutical companies are the best in the world. And then our FDA is the gold standard for regulatory oversight in the world. And that I have 100% confidence in the vaccine. And I said so to my own parents to that end. And I would encourage all soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardmen, to include my sons who serve the Navy and their families to get the vaccine.
Good, thanks, General. I add my voice to that statement. I urge them all to get the vaccine as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Cotton. And let me recognize Senator Gillibrand via WebEx.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to drill down a little bit on the questions that Senator Cotton asked, as well as Senator Shaheen. It's been reported that the Trump administration did not leave a reserve in the national vaccine stockpile for when President Biden took office. So we appear to be trying to ramp up production as fast as possible, but in recent weeks, it appears the daily administration of vaccines has been stalled. Where is the bottleneck in the system, and what can the DoD do to facilitate an increased distribution of vaccines?
Senator, this is General Perna, and I'll start if that's okay. Initially, when the vaccine came off the conveyor belts, I apologize for using that term, very delicate process, we knew that the volume was going to be low. It is the way that the vaccines are manufactured and the process that they have to do to ramp up accordingly. We knew that it would increase after every batch that they run, they would get better at it. And so as we executed the distribution, we planned accordingly to that end. We knew that as it increased, we needed to be able to expand the distribution, and that's why the capability and capacity of private industry was utilized to do so. And I'll pause.
Thank you. Ms. Cummings, on April 5th, 2020, your predecessor, Ms. Ellen Lord, issued a memo, changed the delegation of authority for use of other transactions for prototype projects in response to COVID disease 2019, which is geared basically towards increasing contracting with small and medium-sized firms rather than big defense contractors. Other transaction authority can empower the DoD to move faster, be more flexible in acquisitions, and develop solutions via working with non-traditional, non-defense contractors across the whole of industry and science. Nevertheless, there has been recent criticism that this authority is not being used to the fullest extent. Rick Dunn, the general counsel of DARPA, recently wrote the deficiency of education and understanding on the transaction authority among DoD lawyers, program managers, contracting personnel, and financial managers is a profound handicap that has led to the slow embrace of this program. Are you willing to engage with business leaders in order to cut out the stovepiping and increase the use of other transaction authorities, and particularly to increase the number of minority-owned businesses that we contract with?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. We absolutely value the contribution of small business to the defense industrial base, and what we found during the contracting actions and other agreements such as OTAs is that we were seeing an expansion in the participation of small businesses, and I believe even more than 40% of the contracts that we have been tracking specifically in response to COVID have gone to small businesses. But yes, I will commit to working with the Defense Acquisition Workforce, as well as the Defense Acquisition University and the Service Acquisition Executives, to look to expand the knowledge and understanding across all of the different parts of the workforce to include contracts and legal. Thank you.
And then just to continue the line of questioning that Senator Cotton started, GAO previously reported that DoD plans to use about $687 million of the $1 billion in CARES Act, Defense Production Act funding to mitigate COVID-related problems in the defense industrial base. As of January 2021, DoD has already awarded 37 projects valued at approximately $663 million. Please provide some specific examples of the benefits that the department has already realized through Defense Production Act investments, and how much additional Defense Production Act funding does DoD need to mitigate its highest priority defense industrial base risk over the next 2 years?
Sure, thank you. And I'd be happy to take for the record some specific outcomes of some of the awards that I'm about to talk about. But we made significant investments under DPA Title III in industrial capability to sustain businesses that would otherwise have been either fragile or have gone out of business based on the impacts of COVID in the area of aircraft. So that would be materials to support aircraft production, as well as aircraft engine production, shipbuilding, space, soldier systems to include textiles, electronics, and materials, and hypersonics. But again, I'm happy to come back to you or your staff with specifics on the benefits we've seen from those investments to date.
Thank you. And I'm out of time, but I'd like to submit for the record some specific questions about the shortcomings of childcare for military service members. We've seen it across the board in non-military childcare centers as well. Last I checked, there was one slot for every 8 kids that needed it. And I think that is also a huge problem with the military because they've had to close their child care centers. But I'll submit those for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. And before I recognize Senator Rounds via WebEx, just to clarify a point, I believe that DOD requires 17 immunizations. They can mandate it, but they cannot mandate without informed consent an emergency FDA vaccine, which is the current status. Once it becomes fully approved by FDA, then the Department of Defense can mandate the vaccine. Is that accurate, General Perna? Or whoever is most...
We did research on that, Chairman, and that's a true...
Thank you very much. Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, good morning to all of you, and I want to take this time to just thank you very much for your service to our country and for providing your expert testimony on the Department of Defense's impact to the nation's COVID-19 response to this committee today. I'd like to begin with a question for Ms. Cummings. During the very worst periods of uncertainty at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, we struggled mightily to increase the N95 mask production. And it seems to me that there was a high degree of confusion within DOD with respect to the DPA framework to include leadership processes and situational awareness. Your contributions at that time and former Undersecretary Lord's daily involvement were absolutely crucial to overcoming bureaucratic hurdles and significant delays, and I thank you for that. I am curious to know what your lessons learned are from that period and what you recommend to fix the process so that when we need to use the DPA, it will be a more effective tool for rapidly providing capacity during national emergencies.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I was myself personally involved in the decision and the activities in coordination with HHS to make strategic investments in the capacity for making N95 respirators here in the U.S. And I think one of the major lessons learned that we had in the Department of Defense was that we didn't have those strategic relationships within the acquisition community to the acquisition community at HHS and FEMA that would have been valuable at day one of the pandemic. And so because of that, we created, instead of the task force, which is what we established that I led beginning in March, we transitioned that to a permanent office. That permanent office is part of our Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell. And the goal of that office and the mission of that office is to maintain relationships across the executive branch so that when there is an emergency, whether it is a national, regional, local emergency, that we have the relationships and we have the agreements, interagency agreements in place to quickly respond to that requirement without having to reestablish or newly establish those relationships and, frankly, all of the MOUs and paperwork associated with moving money or moving requirements from one agency to the other.
I just remember that it was a bureaucratic nightmare, and it took direct intervention in order to work our way through it, and I thank you for that. I would like to continue on with Ms. Cummings. How much money from the administration's COVID-19 package is DOD anticipating to devote to the Title III program for both domestic production, for the supply chain, and for end products such as PPE, vaccines, and other critical medical products? And do you think this is going to be sufficient to address the most pressing anticipated requirements that your office is tracking?
I think, am I understanding your question to be the proposal, the supplemental package that includes $10 billion in DPA Title III funding for medical resources?
I'm curious what your current status is.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So the current status is, as we had in the CARES Act $1 billion in DPA Title III funding. We balanced that account between both medical resources, which we allocated $213 million to. We dedicated $100 million towards a loan program. And so that is in order to support subsidies so we can make loans. And then the third was $687 million for the defense industrial base. We have obligated almost that entire account, with the exception of the $100 million that is a set aside for subsidy. That stays in our account, again, to subsidize a larger loan amount. But we did balance that between the defense industrial base and the medical industrial base. But because we were able to move funding from HHS to DOD, we have thus far been able to meet every requirement given to us from HHS to expand N95 respirators, supply chains related to ventilators and surgical masks, as well as testing capacity to include point of care and at-home testing kits.
I think the point I would make is that the resources that you were provided, you've basically expended or utilized at this time. And so if we want to continue with the program, it is critical that we talk about specific targeted needs that would be available for your use.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Round. Let me recognize Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, first of all, thank you for your service. The ranking member, Senator Inhofe, referred to the miracle of our discovery and distribution of the vaccine, but as one of the great American scientists once said, and I can't remember who it was, great inventions and innovations are 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And so I know a lot of your hard work, and equally so the hard work at Pfizer and Moderna. I know particularly Pfizer because I've talked to some of the scientists and managers there, was necessary to bring this vaccine to the American people and to people around the world. So we owe you a great debt of gratitude. I want to thank you, General Perna, for your work, particularly, and for our conversation about the really Herculean steps that you are taking to make this vaccine available on a mass level through many, many more outlets and places of vaccination around the country, which I know is essential to make the vaccine real for people, getting it into their arms. And let me focus for the moment on the question that Senator Reid asked in terms of our military men and women. Is it a regulation or a statute that bars the Pentagon from mandating vaccines? I know that it's under emergency use authorization right now, and if it was given final approval, it could be mandated, but that takes 5-10 years. We don't know how long. So is there a specific legal provision that forbids mandatory vaccination when it has received only emergency use authorization?
Senator, the emergency use authorization is voluntary, as you point out. I believe it is a statute, sir, that does not provide for it to be mandatory. Actually, somebody just handed me the statute so I can read it to you if you'd like the number here, sir. It's emergency use authorization. It's 1107A that talks about the emergency use authorization. So it is a statute, and that's why it's voluntary, sir.
And let me ask you, are there some groups that have been more receptive than others within the military?
It's back on. What we're finding is we've been at this for about 60 days, and we have a vaccine tiering system that we're using. So, for example, in that first tier is our healthcare professionals. And if the population for that healthcare professionals is about 300,000, what we're seeing is over 60% taking the vaccine. And we're able to track who takes the vaccine. The remainder of the individuals in that tiering that are not taking the vaccine, there may be a number of reasons why they're not taking the vaccine. They may have gotten the shot somewhere else, or they may not want to take the vaccine. We're working through that collectively right now to make the determination of what those numbers accurately are. We do track who has taken it, but again, those populations that we have in the tiering system, that's how we're reviewing that. The work
Isn't it available to the entire force?
Sir,
Everybody who wants it?
It will be, sir, but we start with a tier because the way the vaccine is being distributed, you can only get so much supply. So we started with our healthcare workers. Now we're working through our essential mission responsibilities, and then we'll continue to work through that process. It will be available to everyone in the Defense Department that wants to take the vaccine.
So are you saying that so far within our United States Armed Services, the vaccine has been made available only to healthcare workers?
No, sir, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, that was the first tier. We have, it's a tiered system. As we work through the tiers, then we have essential, like strategic forces, our military forces, those types of folks. We work through the system, the tiered system, to the last tier, which is our normal folks that are available for the vaccine, our regular forces. We also look at, in the tiering system, of those that have health conditions. Over 65 is another condition. So as we work through that tier, we make the vaccine available.
Well, my time has expired, but I would like to know how many and in what categories have actually received the vaccine. And I understand that you are working through, I think that was your term, the essential workers, forces. I'd like to know who that is, how many have actually received the vaccine, and what the next tiers are. I would think this vaccine should be made available to all men and women in uniform.
It will be, sir.
Well, it will be, but why hasn't it been already?
Because the vaccine supply is coming, it's coming in different increments, and we're vaccinating based on the priorities. We've already vaccinated.
Shouldn't all of our men and women in uniform be a priority?
They are, sir, and they will get the vaccine.
Okay, I apologize, Mr. Chairman, but I'll look forward to getting more information.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Let me recognize Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today. This has been an extraordinary effort, and I think you can say that all of us are very proud of the accomplishments of those serving in the DoD when it comes to Operation Warp Speed. So thank you, General, very much for your leadership in that area. It really has been quite a success, and we've been able to provide an effective vaccine now to the American people in less than a year, and all Iowans are very thankful for that. And just to go over some of the things that the Department of Defense has done and undertaken since the beginning of this pandemic, a range of actions to support the defense industrial base, which includes establishing a joint acquisition task force to prioritize and increase production capacity of needed medical resources, investing in industrial base expansion, executing the CARES Act and Defense Production Act Title III, supplemental funding, and accelerating progress payments to contractors, and we could go on and on and on. Just an extraordinary effort across the board. Another part of this, the players that I like to recognize all the time are our wonderful National Guardsmen that are out there participating in efforts to support our communities. So we have over 28,000 National Guardsmen that have been activated or mobilized. They're out there in support of FEMA and other various partners across 46 of our states and 3 territories. And so what they're doing, they're supporting the vaccination missions and other medical support missions. So, Mr. Salesses, at what point does the National Guard and the Defense Department complete this mission and then pass the operation over to civil authorities?
Senator, I don't know the exact time frame in which the mission will be complete. Obviously, we've got a lot to finish as a nation with the great work that you've already pointed out that the Guard is doing every day around the country. As we also know, we had 47,000 National Guard members on duty at the peak of this, and now with the 29,000. Right. They've done extraordinary work. I suspect that they will be there until we've vaccinated everybody and we've provided the support that we need to within the communities. They continue to do great work around the country, and I think we're going to continue to rely on them to do that. As you know, the President has authorized 100% reimbursement through the end of September. which is very helpful to the National Guard in executing this mission. So I think we should plan for at least through the end of September, and we'll see what happens after that.
So the Department of Defense has started talking about kind of the need to transition, then we're just not sure of the date.
Again, Senator, it'll be up to what the governors need, really, with the National Guard. So I would look to the governors in each of the states and how they want to continue to use the National Guard in that effort, and what additional federal requirements or federal assistance may be needed. And we're going to work closely with FEMA and with the states, the governors, and the National Guard Bureau to make sure that we're capable of continuing to provide the support that is necessary to the state.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that. And I've seen our guardsmen out and about at various Test Iowa sites, and I know in many of the states they're helping with the vaccine distribution, and they are just very important players to us. The initial vaccine from Pfizer received an emergency use authorization on December 11th, 2020, after a determination was made that it was effective at preventing COVID-19. And again, this was the most efficient and fastest vaccine approval in the history of the United States. And again, such incredible work. With the vaccinations that have been approved, of course, there has been a number of confusing statements and issues with the vaccine distribution when it comes to what is considered a fair allocation. So I know in the state of Iowa, we've had issues understanding that formula. Senator Grassley and I had sent a letter not long ago asking for clarity on what formula was being used to determine what allocation our states were receiving. So, General Perna, if you could shed some light on that and maybe explain what formula is being utilized so that we know that every state is receiving, quote, a fair allocation of the vaccines.
Senator, it is an algorithm. It is based on population, fair and equitable to all. The population is total population based on the census from 18. It's reduced by the number of adolescents in the state. So 18 and above is the total number that we go against. And then the percentage of that population to the percentage of available vaccine being distributed that week is the algorithm that runs. It is strictly a mathematical problem.
Okay, so just to make it clear for everyone, it is based on that algorithm. There aren't other considerations, outside influences that determine the allocation, correct?
Absolutely, no, you're correct 100%.
Okay, thank you very much to our witnesses today and your extraordinary efforts. We really do appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Let me recognize via WebEx Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. General Perna, Operation Warp Speed's goal or mission was to develop, manufacture, and distribute the vaccine. And yes, it was extraordinary, the development of these vaccines in such a short period of time. And we're still involved in the distribution and, of course, the manufacture of it. So under the Biden administration, General Perna, has the DOD's involvement, engagement increased with regard to getting this pandemic under control? And if so, can you just briefly describe what additional things you are doing?
Senator, if I may address what they've done with the actual distribution of the vaccine in support of administration, and then pass to my colleagues with your permission. DOD's been, as stated earlier, Secretary Austin was clear in his guidance that the Department of Defense was going to be a part of the solution, not only to what they contributed to Operational Warp Speed, but now down in support of the governors and local authorities. So FEMA, they're working with FEMA on mass vaccination sites. DOD is assisting with soldiers. They're also supporting down through the federal qualified health centers and community vaccination centers with support. And with that, I'd have to pass to my colleague, Senator.
Thank you. So obviously your role, DOD's role, is definitely increased. under the Biden administration. That's what I heard you say. So does somebody else want to give me a short response?
Can you hear me? Yes, Senator. It has increased. Obviously, the federal vaccine centers that General Perna just alluded to, we've established one in California, Texas, and getting ready to establish other ones in Florida and Pennsylvania. These are what we call type 1 centers. They're able to provide 6,000 shots a day. Secretary Austin was out in California yesterday at our first site in LA, where they're providing that 6,000 sites. We've got 4,000 military personnel prepared to support these sites, and we'll be working very closely with FEMA and the states going forward and where those sites will be established.
Thank you. I think that's very much going to be necessary, because if we're looking at vaccinating a population of some 325 million, that includes 18 million veterans and over 1 million active in DOD, it's going to require all hands on deck, I'd say. By the way, as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine becomes available, is there going to be a push to distribute those one-dose vaccines more than the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines? Is there anybody who can respond to that question?
Senator, it will be the same pro rata approach based on the White House priorities. I've been given guidance to distribute to jurisdictions, to federal pharmacy programs, as well as to FEMA and the federally qualified health centers. So
I think, excuse me, I'm sorry, General, my time is running out. My question really, probably not clearly stated what it was. Is there going to be more Johnson & Johnson vaccines made available, because those are just one dose that do not require the kind of refrigeration that the Pfizer vaccine needs? So you would think that having more of a one-dose vaccine is a more efficient way of vaccinating as many people as we can. Is that going to happen?
Absolutely. We've already contracted for, and we will receive 100 million doses through the month of June. And we are working with the company for what does the future look like for additional doses. Over.
Question for Ms. Cummings. Under the American Rescue Plan, if passed, that includes $10 billion in Defense Production Act funding, which the DoD will need to manage. My question is, what would this funding go for, Ms. Cummings? 10 billion, that's a lot more than the 1.4 billion or so, or the 3 billion that DoD has administered before.
It is indeed, and my understanding is that that would be specifically for medical resources, to include expanding production capacity in the United States for vaccines, vaccine delivery, test capacity, PPE. We would take our lead from HHS and be in a supporting role. And so we would look to HHS and the White House to provide us with specific requirements. We would provide through our executive agent, which is the Air Force, as well as supplemental contracting assistance throughout the department in order to meet those requirements. But again, we would take our lead from HHS as the requirer of health resources. And that is how we would execute that should appropriations be made available.
Thank you. I think, okay, I still have 25 seconds left. For General Perna, due to weather conditions, the number of vaccines that Hawaii was expecting to get, they did not receive it. So close to 40,000 vaccine doses were supposed to come to Hawaii, but due to weather conditions on the mainland, only about 10,000 of those doses came. So are there things that you're doing to ensure that there is as little delay as possible due to weather conditions in distributing the vaccine to places such as Hawaii and Alaska?
Senator, absolutely. We completed delivery of all backlog last night throughout the country, and we will finish the final delivery of this week's vaccines by Friday. So we're caught up to that end.
And is it that all you can do is to catch up as quickly as possible because you don't have control over the weather? And by the way, I hope you're getting enough doses to Guam, Samoa.
We are treating them fair and equitably, and I am personally watching the territories to ensure that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rono. Let me now recognize Senator Tillis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. Mr. Celestis, I think I'll start with you just to follow on to a line of questions that Senator Blumenthal had. It's your goal to vaccinate everybody in the DoD, correct? And the only reason you're not doing it today is you don't have a vaccine for every arm that needs it. Is that correct? Over what period of time do you think, based on the current production capability and maybe some assumptions you can make about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, over what period of time do you think that you could have provided the vaccine to everybody who was willing to take it?
I think it would be late summer, Senator.
Late summer, yeah. So the reason I was asking that question, I think it's fair to say that there are more people willing to take the vaccine than there are vaccines to give. And one thing that I want to make sure of is we don't start focusing attention on vaccine hesitancy until we reach a point to where we have a supply where there is no demand.
Can I provide a clarifying comment, Senator, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
As General Perna pointed out, with the 50 states and 4 territories, there's actually 64 what we call micro plans. One of those plans is DOD, one is VA. We all fit into that plan, so we get our portion of the vaccine distribution.
Yeah.
That's how it works, and then we...
Yeah, I just wanted to make it very clear that there's no reduction in priority. It's more a matter of supply and demand right now, and that I have confidence you're working on it. General Perna, thank you so much. I think you should be very proud of the work that you've led. I am kind of curious because we rightfully, with the once in the last century pandemic of this nature, have shifted attention over, made sure that manufacturing priorities and everything was in place to get the plumbing and get the vaccine out. Have you all been tracking any other therapeutics like flu vaccines or other therapies that were dependent upon the same supply chain base and manufacturing base to understand vulnerabilities there? And how are we working to mitigate that? Is that a part of the problem we're trying to solve, or is that another problem that we have to focus on?
So, Senator, the way we've been looking at it is that as we applied DPA and prioritization for everything we were doing for the COVID vaccine, as I tell the team, we have to be offensive and defensive because we do not want to distract from any of the other life-saving drugs that are necessary for, the American citizens. So we manage it on both sides, and that's how I'm able to do it, to ensure that COVID vaccine continues to be produced in a timely manner, but yet does not disrupt any other life cycle or life-saving materials.
So we don't think that any of the other courses of medications are suffering any critical shortages at this point?
Not at this time, but it depends on how long we're going to keep going,
right,
of course, and the impact. And it would be both for materials to produce as well as the actual materials that are needed to produce, right? So it's a combination of both.
Thank you very much. This could be for Mr. Celestis or Ms. Cummings. I think that we made the right decision in a crisis to really look to the DOD to lead versus a whole of government approach that could have taken us a year to figure out how for everybody to operate efficiently. But the question that I have is, now that we've created a real-life scenario with this pandemic response, what work in the future will we do to potentially vertically integrate the whole of government so that when we execute the next time, maybe it's a little bit less of a demand on the DOD and a better execution for the whole of government? And either of you or General Perna, if you have comments.
I'll start and turn it over to my colleagues. The department has done extraordinary things, as you pointed out, supporting the other federal departments and agencies, and in turn, state and local authorities. We have a mission to do that, the Defense Support of Civil Authorities mission. It went beyond the scope of providing military support, as you well know, to where we worked the acquisition piece in different areas. We provided supply chain support, all of that. I think as we go forward, the department recognizes that we'll be called upon in these types of events to assist, but part of that will be also potentially increasing the capacity and capabilities of our federal partners, whether it's HHS or FEMA. And contracting has a big role in how we deal with many of these emergencies around the nation. So as we look to that in the future, having the ability to leverage the private sector through our contracting capability, whatever federal department or agency that is, and harnessing the ability of the private sector to deal with some of these crises that we go through in the nation would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that that an after action, I want to make sure you're getting shots in arms and beat this pandemic. But I think an after action on how we have a contemporary example of a pandemic response of this kind, that there's something to learn from that. It may be instructive to things that we should consider in the NDA. I'm not going to take any more time except to say I'm going to submit some questions for the record related to reimbursement of from civil authorities, and some general questions on the impact on readiness as we focus so many resources on the COVID response. Thank you all for the great work.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Let me recognize Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Inhofe, and to our witnesses. I'm very much about giving credit where credit is due, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but I think any hearing about COVID has to start with this. It's been a catastrophe. It's been an absolute catastrophe for this country. I think the COVID response in the United States will probably go down as the worst failure of domestic governance in the history of the United States. There have been some failures on the foreign policy, national security side. This is a domestic governance failure. Death toll now in excess of 500,000. The only two sort of singular events with higher death tolls in the history of the United States were the Civil War at 620,000, the Spanish flu at about 675,000. More Americans have died in the last year than in the entire World War II or Vietnam War or Korean War. Dr. Fauci said the other day that the U.S. has handled this worse than just about any other nation. There's no reason that a nation with the technical expertise, resources, research institutions, healthcare professionals that the United States has should have suffered this way. The scale of suffering has been intense. Everyone in this room knows people who've been sick of COVID or died of COVID. I know 9 people who've died of COVID. Last time I checked, the entire nation of Taiwan, very close to China, only had 9 COVID deaths. This has been an atrocity. Not only in the scale of American history, one of the deadliest events in the scale of American history, but compared to other nations. And let's not compare to communist nations or nations that can tell their citizens to get in line and they will. Let's just compare it to other industrialized democracies. The excess deaths experienced by the United States compared to other comparable nations is shameful, is absolutely shameful. It began with the perpetration of a big lie by a president with the biggest microphone on the planet. This will go away, it's not a problem, anti-science messaging. And if we've ever learned how powerful a leader can be, those lies perpetrated at the beginning of this pandemic demonstrate the power of leadership and the power of a microphone that the President of the United States has. There has been spectacular work. General Perna, you and the Warp Speed team, that I will give the Trump administration huge credit for, and I'm going to come back to in a second. The development of the vaccine has really been remarkable. The work of our healthcare professionals, the scale of death and illness that they have seen and had to deal with day in and day out, everywhere from big city hospitals to tiny rural health clinics, has been brutal. And I think we need to do everything we can to keep our healers healthy, our guardsmen and women. I've seen guardsmen and women at testing sites, and then at food banks, and now at vaccination sites, doing some amazing work. And so we have to thank and celebrate some tremendous heroism during this time. But I think any discussion of COVID has to begin with a recognition that this has been an absolutely disastrous moment in the history of this country. Johns Hopkins said this nation was the best prepared nation in the world to deal with a pandemic, and they were right. But from lies perpetrated to the CDC mistakes in the development of a testing protocol, rejecting the WHO test protocol and then developing one that was faulty, we have to get a hold of this. And if we're not willing to begin with that sense of humility about our failures, then we won't be ready for the next one. I have colleagues now, Mr. Chair, who are asking about a 9/11 style commission to analyze the events on January 6th. We need a 9/11 commission to look at why the U.S. fell down on the job. That's what we need the commission about, because there will be another pandemic. And we have to be willing to look ourselves in the mirror and ask what went wrong and then make a commitment to what needs to go better. And I believe the DOD has some significant expertise to offer. General Perna, just one question for you. President Eisenhower used to say a lot of battles get lost because of logistics. You might have all the capacity in the world, but if you can't get at the last tactical mile, then you lose a lot of battles. I think some of the distribution challenges, the development of the vaccine, I mean, has really been miraculous, as Ranking Member Inhofe said. But I think some of the distribution and logistical challenges will have significant lessons for us. One of the reasons that you were put in the spot you're in is because you're a logistics expert. Can you just share some kind of, thinking for us down the road about the logistical challenges and things you've learned along the way that can inform us if we do a commission to try to figure out how to better deal with this in the future? Thank you.
Senator, quickly, yes, and I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of that because of the expertise that I brought. It was clear that the industrial base was capable of delivering the vaccine from factory down to the jurisdictions. Quite frankly, really remarkably proud. Went to all 64 jurisdictions simultaneously. We did have to ramp up exponentially the ability to distribute to the total number of locations. We went from a registration of roughly 7,000 places to deliver the vaccine to over 130,000. Then we had to match what was available to the priority of execution, initially long-term health care facilities and frontline medical. So we were precisioned in delivery. And now, as vaccine becomes available, it's about expanding it to the breadth and the depth, bringing in the mass vaccination sites and then the local pharmacies, over 40,000 of them registered. We can deliver to their front doors, and that's what will bring us success as the vaccine increases in volume in March, April, and May.
We'll keep relying on that expertise, General Perna. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Let me recognize Senator Kramer.